Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. In the world of Harry Potter, there are two sides of magic. The light one, approved and taught at Hogwarts, and the dark one, which people prefer not to speak about. It's this dark magic that remains one of the most mysterious and controversial topics in the entire universe. In the books, it's only briefly mentioned, through curses, dangerous objects, or spells that inspire fear. But if you dig deeper, you'll realize dark magic is far more complex than simple evil. Today, I'll tell you about its true nature. Enjoy the video. Number 1, dark magic doesn't always mean evil. It's commonly believed that any dark spell is evil, but in reality, everything depends on intent. The dark arts include any magic capable of causing harm to another being. Yet harm doesn't always equal malice. Severus Snape killed Dumbledore, an act that looked like pure darkness from the outside, but in truth it was an act of mercy, a prearranged step meant to save Draco Malfoy. The same goes for Harry when he used the Imperious Curse to infiltrate Gringotts. The spell was dark, but his goal was noble. Number 2, what the dark arts really are. In the wizarding world, dark magic refers to any form of spellwork aimed at inflicting harm, pain, or destruction. It's not demonic magic or spirit summoning, as many think. The dark arts are, rather, a distorted reflection of regular magic, where the caster's motive matters most. Any spell can become dark if used with the intent to harm. Even something as simple as Accio, if cast to rip a wand from someone's hand, becomes an act of aggression. Number 3, true darkness is born in the heart of the caster. To wield dark magic, it's not enough to speak the incantation. You must truly desire to cause pain. Bellatrix Lestrange explained this best. The unforgivable curses only work when the wizard genuinely wishes suffering upon the victim. Harry tried to use Cruciatus against Bellatrix, but failed. He lacked real hatred. Yet against Amicus Caro, he succeeded when driven by anger and determination. That's the boundary between light and darkness. The will to harm. Number 4, the scars of dark magic never heal. In the wizarding world, almost any wound can be healed, except those caused by darkness. Such injuries always leave a trace. Harry Potter's scar is proof of that. No potion or spell could erase the mark left by the killing curse. Dumbledore's hand, George Weasley's ear, Bill's cursed wounds, all of them were caused by dark magic, and none ever truly healed. Number 5, ordinary objects can be turned into dark ones. Darkness isn't limited to spell. It can dwell within things. Any object can be cursed if imbued with malicious intent. That's how deadly artifacts are created: necklaces, rings, books. The most terrifying example is Voldemort's Horcruxes, which contain fragments of his soul. Such items don't merely carry evil, they corrupt the minds of those who touch them. Number 6. Some magical creatures are born of darkness. There are beings whose very nature is bound to the dark. The basilisk, a creature bred by a parselmouth, kills with a single glance. Dementors are not the result of sorcery, but the embodiment of sorrow, pain, and despair made flesh. They are darkness itself, and their essence cannot be changed. Number 7. The dark arts are allowed to some extent. Despite the fear and condemnation, dark magic isn't completely banned. In Britain, only the 3 unforgivable curses are officially illegal. Everything else exists in a grey zone. Borgin and Burke's is a vivid example, a shop that openly trades dangerous artifacts, such as the cursed necklace used by Draco Malfoy. Technically, selling such items isn't forbidden if they're bought for collection rather than attack. Number 8. Not all wands can channel dark magic. A wand reflects its owner's character. Some wands simply can't perform dark magic. For instance, those with unicorn hair cores. Such wands are too pure and refuse to obey evil intentions. Ollivander once said that wands with this core become weak when held by a dark wizard. Interestingly, Draco Malfoy's wand had a unicorn hair core. Perhaps that's why he never became a true servant of darkness. Number 9, there's a philosophy behind dark magic. Dark magic isn't just about destruction, it's a philosophy. Its followers believe that fear is power and that control is the purest form of strength. To them, pain is not cruelty, but a tool, a way to dominate others and prove superiority. Voldemort embodied this belief. "There is no good and evil," he told Harry. "There is only power and those too weak to seek it." That single idea became the foundation of his entire rule. He saw magic not as a gift to protect life, but as a weapon to conquer it. Some spells, like legilimency, were born from that same mindset. They allowed a wizard to break into another's thoughts, stripping away secrets and free will. Snape, who mastered the art, described it as a delicate, dangerous skill. Under Voldemort, it became a weapon of interrogation, used to bend even the strongest minds. To study such magic required more than skill. It demanded cold detachment. It wasn't about casting spells anymore, it was about mastering people. That is why dark magic became not just an art, but a school of thought, one that taught its students to rule through fear and silence compassion in the name of control. Number 10, some spells cannot be learned from books. Not every spell can be found in a book. Some curses are too dangerous, too unpredictable, to ever be written down. They survive only through whispers, passed from one dark wizard to another, sealed in memory and fear. "Words have power," Dumbledore once said, "but intent is what gives them life." These secret incantations were born not in classrooms but in obsession, in the hearts of wizards who wanted to bend the laws of magic itself. That Grindelwald was one of them. Before Voldemort, he sought to master forgotten spells. Magic so old it had no name. Legends tell of curses he learned from Eastern Europe, buried in ruins and guarded by blood oaths. He believed some magic could not be learned. It had to be earned. When he fought Dumbledore in their legendary duel, witnesses described light and fire, unlike anything seen before. Forces that felt alive, ancient, and hungry. None of it came from books. Even blood magic itself, as old as the first wizard clans, was never truly written. The rituals were carved into stone, sung in languages long dead. Those who tried to record them found their parchments turning to ash. Such power resists being contained. It demands secrecy. That is why the darkest spells are not taught, only remembered. They linger in relics, in symbols, in the trembling words of those who once dared to speak them aloud. Number 11. Dark artifacts can have a will of their own. Some dark artifacts seem almost alive. Once soaked in dark magic, they begin to think, to feel, to want. They remember their masters and whisper to new ones. Power like that doesn't stay silent. The longer you keep it, the harder it is to part with, Dumbledore warned. Dark objects don't just serve, they tempt, twisting the heart of anyone who dares to claim them. The diary of Tom Riddle was the most chilling example. At first, it seemed harmless, just an old notebook that listened and wrote back. Ginny Weasley confided in it, pouring out her fears and secrets, but the diary was listening too closely. It answered gently, winning her trust, and then began to take from her strength, her will, her very soul. Soon she was opening the Chamber of Secrets without remembering it. The book didn't just contain Voldemort's soul, it acted with purpose, manipulating her like a puppet. When Harry stabbed the diary with the basilisk fang, ink bled like black blood, and the ghost of Riddle screamed as it dissolved. It was a moment that proved a horrifying truth. Some dark creations no longer belong to their makers. They become beings of their own, hungry for power, for fear, for life. Once born, they do not die easily. They wait for the next hand foolish enough to open the cover. Number 12. Blood magic is one of the oldest dark arts. Blood magic is among the oldest and darkest forms of sorcery. It draws power from life itself, the pulse that binds body and soul. Wizards have always feared it because blood carries more than strength. It carries identity, lineage, and love. Blood runs deep, Dumbledore once said, and it remembers. To use it is to touch something ancient and wild, a power that answers not to reason, but to sacrifice. Voldemort understood this better than anyone. When he returned to life in the Goblet of Fire, he chose Harry's blood for his rebirth. The blood of the enemy, forcibly taken, he whispered, before the cauldron. He believed that by taking it, he would steal the protection Lily Potter had given her son, the love that had once destroyed him. In his arrogance, he thought he had mastered that love, but in truth, the blood bound them both, ensuring that when Harry lived, Voldemort could not truly die. Blood magic appears in subtler ways too. The ancient enchantments protecting the Dursleys' home were based on family blood. As long as Harry could call that house his home, Lily's sacrifice shielded him. The same principle guarded the Black family's ancestral house, sealed by blood and name. These enchantments cannot be broken by spells alone. They are written in life itself. Yet every act of blood magic carries a cost. The more power it demands, the deeper the wound it leaves. Sacrifices bind, but they also scar. Voldemort believed blood would make him invincible, but it was blood, Lily's, Harry's, and even his own, that doomed him in the end. The magic he twisted for domination became the chain that dragged him to his fall. Number 13. Darkness preys on the broken and hurt. Darkness finds its way most easily into broken hearts. The dark arts rarely tempt the happy or the whole. They whisper instead to those wounded by loss, betrayal, or rejection. Pain becomes their doorway. Voldemort understood this better than anyone. He sought followers among the desperate and the angry, those who felt unseen. To them, the Dark Lord offered power, belonging, and a way to strike back at the world that had hurt them. And they followed him, believing the darkness would heal what the light ignored. Draco Malfoy is one of the clearest examples. In The Half-Blood Prince, he wasn't driven by ambition alone, but by fear and despair. Pressured by his family's legacy, cornered by Voldemort's threats, he accepted a task that would break him, to kill Dumbledore. Rowling writes, he was pale and sweating, his wand shaking in his hand. Draco wasn't evil, he was terrified. And fear, like pain, is fertile ground for the dark arts. Even Severus Snape once stood at that same crossroads. Rejected by Lily Potter, humiliated by his peers, and consumed by bitterness, he turned to the only place that welcomed him, the followers of the Dark Lord. He believed that darkness could give him strength, but in the end it nearly destroyed him. Only love pulled him back. As Dumbledore told Harry, you have a power that Voldemort has never had. You can love. Snape's story proved that the same heart that succumbs to the dark can still find its way to the light. Sirius Black said it best. We've all got both light and dark inside us. What matters is the part we choose to act on. That truth lies at the core of every wizard's struggle. The dark arts don't enslave by force, they seduce through pain, and once the wound speaks louder than the conscience, the fall begins. Number 14, there is a price to learning dark magic. Learning dark magic always comes with a price. Knowledge alone isn't enough. It demands something far deeper. Every curse, every forbidden spell takes a fragment of the soul. Over time, that loss becomes visible. Magic beyond limits, as Voldemort once called it, stripped him of everything that made him human. His pursuit of immortality cost him his body, his empathy, and even his name. What remained was power without warmth, existence without life. The creation of the Horcruxes was his greatest triumph and his greatest curse. To split one's soul, a wizard must commit murder, an act so unnatural that it shatters the very essence of being. Dumbledore explained it simply. Murder rips the soul apart. Voldemort did it not once, but 7 times. Each act hollowed him out further until his face reflected the monstrosity within, pale, serpentine, and empty. He lived forever, yet became a shadow of himself. But even lesser curses can twist their users. The Cruciatus curse, designed to inflict unbearable pain, leaves its mark on both the victim and the caster. Bellatrix Lestrange used it with delight, and it shaped her completely. Her laughter during torture, her wild eyes, they weren't madness alone, they were the result of years of reveling in cruelty. Power and pain had become indistinguishable to her. The curse had rewritten her soul. Dark magic promises control, but demands surrender. Every spell pulls its master deeper into obsession until the line between strength and corruption disappears. The more a wizard uses it, the more it reshapes them. As Dumbledore once said, it is our choices that show what we truly are. And those who choose the dark arts soon discover the price is always themselves. Number 15, dark magic is hard to control. Dark magic is like fire. Once lit, it refuses to obey. Even the most skilled wizards admit that once you step into the shadows, it's nearly impossible to turn back. The dark arts feed on emotion, fear, anger, despair. And when those emotions spiral out of control, so does the magic itself. What begins as power soon becomes chaos, devouring the very person who wields it. Crabbe learned this lesson the hard way. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, he unleashed fiend fire inside the Room of Requirement, a cursed blaze so wild that even Voldemort's followers feared it. The flames took shape as monstrous creatures, serpents, chimeras, dragons, each hungrier than the last. "It's fiend fire!" Hermione screamed. "You can't control it!" But Crabbe didn't listen. His fear had already taken the reins. The fire grew faster than thought. It swallowed the room, devouring everything in its path. Goyle barely escaped. Malfoy was saved only because Harry turned back for him. Crabbe wasn't so lucky. The very spell he cast consumed him, proving that dark magic doesn't serve, it rules. Once unleashed, it demands payment in blood and soul. Even Dumbledore once warned that power corrupts those who seek it too deeply. The dark arts are no exception. They promise strength, but bind their master with invisible chains. Every spell cast in anger leaves a mark, and the more a wizard surrenders to that darkness, the less of himself remains. Number 16. Some ancient rituals are still forbidden. It is said that the darkest knowledge of the wizarding world never truly disappears. It merely sleeps in the corners of forbidden libraries and sealed chambers, waiting for those bold or foolish enough to wake it. The Ministry of Magic has long struggled to maintain control over such knowledge, especially the ancient rituals that predate even the founding of Hogwarts. These are not the simple curses or hexes taught in Defense Against the Dark Arts. These are the primal invocations, rituals that whisper to the very boundaries of life and death. Though centuries have passed since their last known performance, records remain, carefully hidden in the Department of Mysteries under layers of enchantments. Among these records are descriptions of rites so perilous that even uttering their names in full is forbidden. One of the most unsettling among them is the ritual of the mirror, a spell so old that its origins trace back to the Celtic Druids who first explored the magic of reflection and time. According to ministry documents from the 13th century, this ritual was once used by seers who wished to gaze beyond their fates. The mirror, when enchanted under a specific lunar alignment, did not show the present self, but revealed the moment of one's death. The mirror reflects not the face you wear, but the silence that will claim it. An anonymous unspeakable, wrote in a classified report now preserved in the archives. Witnesses of those early experiments describe the ritual as both mesmerizing and fatal, for many wizards who looked into the mirror lost their minds or sought to hasten the death they had seen. The ritual of the mirror was banned by the Magical Council of 1432, following a tragic incident involving the divination scholar Roderick Muldoon. Obsessed with foreknowledge, Muldoon attempted to perform the rite in secret using a fragment of obsidian rumoured to be part of the Mirror of Erised. What he saw that night remains unknown, but his journals were later discovered in the ruins of his home, every page blackened by fire except one which read, "The future is not to be seen but to be survived." Since then, even the study of reflective necromancy has been deemed a violation of magical law, a crime punishable by imprisonment in Azkaban. Yet there were other rites, darker still, that dealt not with visions, but with the substance of life itself. The circle of repentance, perhaps the most feared among them, was said to allow a witch or wizard to exchange another's life for their own survival. Its instructions were found in fragments within the Liber Obscura, a tome confiscated by the ministry in 1796. The ritual demanded the creation of a perfect circle of blood, within which the caster's remorse would be measured by the strength of their magic. If the remorse was deemed genuine by the spell, the circle would ignite in silver light, and life would be transferred from victim to supplicant. If not, both souls would be devoured by the void between worlds. The ministry records mention that during the first Goblin Rebellion, a desperate aura named Elspeth Crow attempted to use the Circle of Repentance to save her fallen brother. The act resulted in the annihilation of an entire village near Tinworth, leaving behind nothing but ashes and the faint echo of a heartbeat that, according to survivors, continued to sound long after the fire died. "No one cheats death without owing it a debt," said head aura Amos Burke in his report. Words that became a grim warning etched onto the vault door where Crow's circle was later sealed. That vault, according to a 20th century inventory of the Department of Mysteries, remains unopened to this day. Even the subject of death itself has long tempted the minds of scholars and dark wizards alike. As Albus Dumbledore once told Harry Potter, "To the well-organized mind, death is but the next great adventure." But not all who pursued that adventure did so with wisdom. Some sought to reverse it. Ancient necromantic practices, older than the Horcrux and far crueler, once offered a path to resurrection, but at the cost of another's soul. The most infamous of these was known simply as the Rite of the Hollow Veil. It involved invoking spirits through the veil in the death chamber, the same mysterious archway Harry later saw in the Department of Mysteries. Wizards who practiced it believed that life could be lured back from the other side if a pure enough vessel was sacrificed. During the late 1500s, a secret order known as the Brethren of the Hollow Veil was rumoured to have formed within the ministry itself. Its members, many of them unspeakables, conducted experiments beneath London, attempting to communicate with the dead. Their leader, Cassian Vane, wrote extensively on his attempts to anchor the souls of the departed into living bodies. What began as a quest to understand grief became a descent into obsession. When his experiments were finally discovered, the department found a chamber lined with mirrors, each holding a frozen, terrified reflection. The bodies of the brethren were never found. Only Vane's final note survived. "We reached the other side, but it did not wish to let us go." The prohibition of such practices was not merely moral, but existential. Each ritual seemed to disturb the very balance of magic, producing unpredictable effects. The unspeakables recorded cases of magical contamination, where spells would no longer obey the caster, and charms bent themselves toward destruction. One entry from the 18th century archives describes a wizard whose shadow detached and lived on after his death, whispering secrets to those who dared to stand near his tomb. It was said to repeat the same warning endlessly: "Do not unmake what time has sealed." Number 17. Even muggles have used dark power. There are whispers in the wizarding world that darkness does not always require a wand. Even among muggles, those who live without magic, there have been strange echoes of the dark arts, as though something ancient and forbidden found a way to cross the boundary between worlds. Wizards often dismiss such tales as superstition, but the archives of the Department of Mysteries tell a more complex story. Some muggles have indeed come dangerously close to the shadow of magic, even without possessing a spark of it. And the story of Sir Nicholas Grimble, an English nobleman of the 17th century, stands as one of the most chilling proofs of this forbidden connection. Sir Nicholas Grimble was not a wizard. He was a learned man of his time, fascinated by philosophy and alchemy, much like many muggles who tried to imitate the powers of the magical world without truly understanding them. In 1673, records suggest that he acquired an unusual ring from an anonymous traveller who had come from the East. The ring was described as dark iron with an inner glow, bearing a strange, snake-like engraving. What Grimble did not know was that this ring was once tied to one of the most dangerous artifacts ever created, a relic that had once passed through the hands of Lord Voldemort himself. The ring was said to whisper. Servants of Grimble's manor spoke of hearing their master muttering to himself late at night, answering a voice that no one else could hear. He became reclusive, pale, and obsessed with mortality. He spoke of conquering death, one written testimony reads, as if death were a rival he could outwit with knowledge. This obsession mirrored the very philosophy that fueled Voldemort centuries later, the same hunger that drove men and wizards alike to the brink of ruin. It is said that the ring contained a fragment of a soul, sealed within through the darkest of enchantments, a Horcrux, an object not meant to be touched by mortal hands, let alone by a muggle unprotected by magic. Those who studied the case later in the 20th century, including historians from Hogwarts, suggested that Grimble's possession was not mere madness. The energy that lingered in that ring would have been enough to infect even a non-magical mind. Hermione Granger once remarked in The Deathly Hallows, "Objects that have absorbed dark magic never lose it completely." Though she spoke of wizards' relics, the principle could easily extend to any who dared to handle them. And so it was with Grimble, the muggle who unknowingly became a vessel for a shadow that had survived long after its creator's fall. It is known that by the end of 1674, Sir Nicholas had transformed his estate into something resembling a temple. Witnesses claimed that the walls were marked with runes, crude imitations of magical symbols. He had collected relics from across Europe, pagan idols, alchemical manuscripts, bones of unknown origin. He called this his Hall of Eternal Sight. Many dismissed it as madness, but one visitor, a wandering wizard named Edric Flint, later reported to the ministry that he felt a suffocating weight inside the manor, a pressure that seemed to come from the very air. Flint wrote that the house reeked of the residue of enchantment, and that the Muggle himself glowed faintly with the residue of possession. The tragedy unfolded on the night of the winter solstice. Sir Nicholas was found dead in his library, surrounded by candles that had burned down to pools of wax. His right hand was blackened, almost charred, as though he had touched fire. The ring was gone. No trace of it was ever found. In the magical world, rumours spread quickly that a Death Eater in the 19th century had once found and used the same ring, though no proof was ever established. Yet the pattern was unmistakable. Darkness, once released, rarely disappears. It moves, waits, and finds new hosts. Historians later argued that Grimble's fate was the perfect example of how the dark arts transcend the limits of magic. Even without a wand, his fascination became a ritual of its own. He poured intention, fear, and belief into every act. Magic, as Dumbledore once said, leaves traces. Perhaps that trace exists not only in spells but in human will, the pure, raw desire that binds the magical and non-magical worlds alike. Some scholars from the Department of Mysteries claimed that Grimble had unknowingly performed a kind of emotional enchantment, feeding the remnant within the ring through his obsession and despair. There are, of course, other records of similar incidents, Muggles, who stumbled upon magical artifacts and were forever changed. In 1802, a French collector named Henri Valmont reportedly found a cursed mirror believed to have belonged to one of the Lestrange family. He became haunted by his own reflection, claiming that something behind the glass was watching him. In 1921, an American archaeologist unearthed a set of runic stones in Iceland that emitted faint magical energy. Several members of his team later vanished under mysterious circumstances. But among all these stories, Grimble's stands apart because his involvement with darkness was not accidental. It was invited. The dark arts, according to Hogwarts' most guarded texts, feed on curiosity and ambition. Fear of a name increases fear of the thing itself, Hermione once reminded Harry. The same applies to knowledge. Grimble sought to understand what should never be touched, believing that his intellect could protect him. Instead, it consumed him. The ring's whisper turned his ambition into worship, his reason into delusion. Wizards might call it a curse, but in the eyes of some unspeakables, it was a kind of infection spreading across the boundary that separates magic from the mundane. Number 18. Dark magic can corrupt magical space. The study of the dark arts has always carried an air of forbidden allure, a whisper of danger that even the most disciplined wizards find difficult to ignore. For centuries, magical scholars have debated the true nature of darkness. Is it simply magic used with cruel intent, or does it possess a distinct corruptive essence of its own? The answer, as it turns out, may lie somewhere in between. The dark arts are not merely spells or curses, they are a force capable of warping the very fabric of magic itself. Those who wield it for long enough leave behind invisible wounds on the world, places where the air hums, potions curdle, and the simplest charms refuse to obey their caster's will. It is said among old wizarding families that some lands remember the evil done upon them. There are tales of villages where wand light dims for no reason, of abandoned manors where fireplaces never burn clean, and of forests where patronuses vanish before they are fully formed. These are not just superstitions whispered to frighten young witches and wizards. The Department of Mysteries has confirmed that regions heavily steeped in dark rituals show measurable fluctuations in magical energy. Wards become unstable, protective charms fade faster, and spells with otherwise harmless effects can turn unpredictable or even dangerous. It is as if the land itself rebels against further enchantment, as if magic has been poisoned. One of the most well-documented cases of this phenomenon surrounds the decaying Gaunt family estate, once home to the ancestors of Lord Voldemort himself. The Gaunt shack, hidden deep within the woods near Little Hangleton, was described by Albus Dumbledore as a place where even the light seemed reluctant to enter. When Ministry investigators entered the site after Voldemort's downfall, they noted a peculiar sensation in the air, a faint ringing like a high-pitched echo that never ceased. Wands trembled in their hands. One aura later wrote that spells seemed to resist being cast, as though the magic in the air were thick with pain. This was no ordinary house. It was a place scarred by generations of obsession, cruelty, and one of the darkest magical objects ever made, a Horcrux. When Voldemort transformed Marvolo Gaunt's ring into a Horcrux, he performed an act so vile that even the surrounding magic twisted under its weight. A Horcrux is not merely a container of a soul fragment, it is an abomination against the laws of nature and the equilibrium of life and death. By tearing his soul apart, Voldemort disturbed the magical order that connects all living beings. The result over time was a sort of contamination, an echo that lingered long after the physical object was destroyed. When Dumbledore destroyed the ring in 1996, the immediate corruption ceased to spread, yet the taint remained. The air around the ruins reportedly shimmered faintly for years afterward, and the grass that grew nearby was described as brittle and colourless, as if the soil itself had forgotten how to nourish life. In one of the Department of Mysteries' internal reports, Unspeakables compared this phenomenon to what Muggles might call radiation. Though magical in nature, the analogy is fitting. Dark magic, especially when performed repeatedly or with great intensity, appears to saturate the magical environment, causing lingering disturbances that no spell or ritual can fully cleanse. A similar effect was noted at the site of the Battle of Hogwarts, particularly near the Forbidden Forest, where numerous dark curses were unleashed during the final confrontation. Even months later, students who ventured too close to certain parts of the forest reported hearing faint whispers and seeing flashes of green light that vanished the moment they turned to look. There is growing belief among magical ecologists, a newly emerging field of study, that magic behaves like a living ecosystem. It grows, breathes, balances, and can be wounded. Just as deforestation or pollution harms the Muggle world, the reckless use of dark arts damages the ecology of magic. The late Bathilda Bagshot, in her lesser-known essay, The Flow of Magical Currents, described magic as a river of intention and life, pure until it meets corruption. If that river is poisoned, every spell drawn from it becomes unstable. This theory might explain why even simple spells can behave erratically in cursed locations. In the Gaunt Shack, Lumos spells burned with a faint red tint. In the ruins of the old Riddle House, where Voldemort once resurrected himself, the same charm flickered like a dying candle. Such distortions are not new to wizarding history. Records from the 17th century mention dead zones in magical Europe, places where witches could not conjure a spark of light no matter how powerful they were. One of the most infamous was the Valley of Durmstrang, where a group of dark wizards led by an exile named Arctur Melinov attempted to pierce the veil between life and death. For decades after their failure, students from the Durmstrang Institute were forbidden to enter the valley. Reports told of strange phenomena, time dilation, whispering winds, and spontaneous shattering of glass. Charms. The area was later sealed by order of the International Confederation of Wizards, who referred to it in official documents as a magically unsound region. Hermione Granger once theorized that these magical disturbances could accumulate across generations. In her later writings for the Daily Prophet, she warned that the scars left by dark magic are not just historical, they are environmental. Her words proved prophetic when years later ministry surveyors found that wands performed differently depending on proximity to old war sites. Spell accuracy decreased, magical fatigue increased, and enchantments wore off faster. Some experts suggest that this phenomenon might even affect wand lore, that certain woods or cores absorb traces of corrupted magic, explaining why older wands from the Voldemort era often exhibited erratic behavior. Number 19. Fear makes dark magic stronger. Fear has always been a silent force in the wizarding world, lurking behind every act of dark magic. It is invisible, yet tangible, like a chill that seeps through one's bones long before a curse is cast. In the realm of the dark arts, fear is not merely an emotion, it is fuel, an essence that empowers spells and strengthens those who wield them. Dark wizards have long understood that terror weakens their enemies and simultaneously nourishes their own strength. The more dread spreads, the more potent their magic becomes. In this sense, fear is both weapon and sustenance, the shadow that keeps the darkness alive. To understand this phenomenon, one must first recall the nature of dark magic itself. Unlike the pure forms of protective or healing spells which rely on intent and discipline, the dark arts thrive on emotion, particularly negative ones. Anger, hatred, envy, and despair all feed into the fabric of a curse, but fear remains the most intoxicating of all. It is fear that opens cracks in the human soul, making both caster and victim more vulnerable to corruption. The act of channeling fear, feeling it, inflicting it, witnessing it, creates a cycle that strengthens the spell and binds it to its wielder. Dementors are perhaps the clearest embodiment of this concept. They do not cast spells, nor do they wield wands. Their power lies in what they draw from others. The moment one approaches, every happy thought fades, replaced by cold paralysis. They consume fear and despair the way humans breathe air. They infest the darkest, filthiest places. They glory in decay and despair. They drain peace, hope, and happiness out of the air around them, Remus Lupin once explained to Harry. The more terror they inspire, the stronger they become. When prisoners screamed in Azkaban, those cries were not wasted, they were nourishment. The Dementor's kiss, which steals the soul, is simply the ultimate expression of feeding upon the very essence of human fear. Lord Voldemort understood this principle better than anyone. His rise to power was not built solely upon mastery of magic, but upon mastery of fear itself. He weaponized the terror of his name, creating an aura of dread that extended his influence far beyond his physical presence. Even before he returned to full strength, his fear lingered like an echo in the wizarding world. People hesitated to speak his name, whispering instead, "You know who." That hesitation itself was a form of submission. The fear of Voldemort did not die when he disappeared. It simmered in the hearts of those who had survived his first reign. That fear kept the shadow of his magic alive. The Death Eaters, Voldemort's devoted followers, acted as extensions of that fear. Clad in black robes and silver masks, they were not merely soldiers but symbols. Their sudden appearances at the Quidditch World Cup, in the homes of prominent witches and wizards, even within the Ministry, served a deeper purpose than terrorizing victims. They were spreading the emotional contagion that dark magic needed to thrive, Every scream, every whispered rumor, every headline in the Daily Prophet served as invisible fuel. The more chaos the Death Eaters sowed, the more powerful Voldemort's magic became. One striking example of this effect can be found during the night of Albus Dumbledore's death. The Death Eaters' attack on Hogwarts was not just an act of assassination, but a ritual of intimidation. When Bellatrix Lestrange and her companions stormed through the castle, laughter echoing through the halls, they were not merely celebrating cruelty, they were feeding. The panic of students, the shock of teachers, the grief of the Order, all of it strengthened the emotional field from which dark magic draws power. In that night's chaos, Voldemort's shadow seemed to stretch further than ever before. Fear also amplifies the potency of curses themselves. When a victim trembles, their magical resistance falters. The Patronus charm, for instance, which requires a strong, happy memory, becomes nearly impossible to perform in the presence of overwhelming dread. You feel cold, you can't think, you can't feel happiness, as Harry described his first encounter with a Dementor. It is not merely psychological. Fear disrupts the very essence of magic. The defensive energy that might repel a curse weakens under panic. Conversely, a dark wizard channeling that same atmosphere of fear can make even simple jinxes take on dreadful power. Bellatrix Lestrange was a master of emotional manipulation in battle. Her duel with Neville Longbottom during the Battle of Hogwarts demonstrated this principle. She taunted him, reminded him of his tortured parents, and laughed as she cast her spells. Her laughter was not mockery, it was ritualistic. By forcing Neville to relive his fear and grief, she was feeding the curse she cast. Every wave of her wand drew power from the emotion she provoked. When Harry fought her later, he realized that her magic seemed to thrum with something more than mere spellwork. It was alive, pulsing with emotional energy. The same pattern appears in the unforgivable curses. To cast the Cruciatus curse effectively, the caster must mean it. They must genuinely desire the victim's pain. Fear, both their own and that of the target, amplifies that desire. The killing curse, Avada Kedavra, is born of pure, cold hatred, but even it becomes more destructive when cast in a moment of terror or fury. When Voldemort tried to kill Harry as a baby, his fear of the prophecy, his dread of defeat, intertwined with his hate, creating a curse powerful enough to rebound upon him. In that instant, his fear both empowered and destroyed him. This paradox that fear strengthens dark magic but can also corrupt its wielder is central to understanding why few who turn to the dark arts ever escape unscathed. The magic feeds on fear but also deepens it, creating dependency. Once a wizard learns to draw power from fear, they begin to seek it, consciously or not. They crave the trembling of others, the screams, the silence after destruction, but with every act of cruelty their own soul darkens. The boundary between self and shadow fades. Voldemort's own mutilation, his loss of humanity, can be seen as the ultimate consequence of feeding too long on fear. This connection between emotion and magical strength also explains why hope and courage are the most effective counterforces. Dumbledore's words to Harry in the darkest moments always returned to this truth. Happiness can be found even in the darkest of times if one only remembers to turn on the light. Hope, unlike fear, weakens the resonance of dark spells. It restores clarity, repels Dementors, and severs the invisible threads that bind a victim's magic to despair. This is why the Patronus charm, a spell of light and joy, is the antithesis of the dark arts. It is powered by the exact opposite energy. During the Battle of Hogwarts, when Harry returned from the Forbidden Forest, believed to be dead, and revealed himself alive, the tide of battle turned instantly. The Death Eaters faltered, their spells weakening. Voldemort's curses lost precision. The fear that had sustained them cracked, replaced by courage and defiance. In that single moment, the collective emotion of the defenders became a shield stronger than any enchantment. The dark magic that once thrived in Hogwarts began to dissolve. This was not symbolic, it was magical law. Fear had been replaced by faith, and the darkness lost its food. Even Severus Snape's life serves as an example of how emotion shapes magic's strength. His ability to master occlumency depended on his control of fear. He understood that Voldemort could only invade his mind if he allowed emotion to weaken him. But the same principle that shielded Snape from the Dark Lord also bound him to darkness. His love for Lily Potter, a pure emotion, clashed with the fear and guilt that shadowed his every act. This duality made him a rare figure who wielded dark magic without surrendering entirely to it, proving that the line between light and dark is not drawn by spells but by emotion. Throughout wizarding history, every period of darkness has been accompanied by widespread fear. Grindelwald's rise in Europe, for instance, mirrored Voldemort's later campaign in Britain. Grindelwald's followers carried the same gleaming eyes of fanaticism, the same hunger for control through terror. The banners with his symbol, twin triangles enclosing a circle, became emblems not only of ideology but of fear itself. It was not the number of his spells that made him dangerous, but the reach of his influence over hearts and minds. When people believe themselves helpless, dark power multiplies. Ultimately, dark magic is a mirror reflecting the deepest fears of both its victims and its wielders. It thrives in secrecy, in whispers, in sleepless nights when hope flickers. Its strength is not in ancient runes or forbidden rituals, but in the emotions that humans cannot suppress. Every terrified breath, every silence after a scream, every tear shed in despair. All of these become echoes that the darkness collects. Voldemort and his followers did not invent this truth. They merely exploited it. The dark arts, after all, are not born from spells, they are born from fear. Number 20, defending against dark magic requires inner strength. There is a moment in the history of Hogwarts that reveals how fragile even the strongest wizards can be when they stand before the forces of darkness. The art of defending against such power is not merely a question of skill or memorized incantations. It is a battle of will, of heart, and of the very soul. The Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom has witnessed many students who believed they were ready, armed with their wands and courage, only to discover that true protection begins far deeper than the flick of a wrist or the shout of a spell. Professor Mad-Eye Moody once said, "A constant vigilance." His words were not just a warning, but a philosophy. Moody, a man who had faced more dark wizards than anyone alive, understood that the darkness one fights is not only out there, it is also within. To be a true defender, a witch or wizard must train both mind and spirit. It was not enough to learn how to cast a shield charm or disarm an opponent. The real challenge came in moments of fear, when one's deepest doubts whispered from the shadows. Moody's magical eye saw through walls and lies alike, but even he could not see through the hidden vulnerabilities that made a person susceptible to the dark arts. Albus Dumbledore, perhaps the greatest light of his time, also carried shadows of his own. He once told Harry, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." That phrase contains the essence of the struggle against darkness. Dumbledore knew that knowledge alone was powerless if the heart was weak. In his youth, he had once been drawn toward power, fascinated by the dark ideas of Gellert Grindelwald. His victory over his old friend came not just through superior magic, but through a painful understanding of his own flaws. Dumbledore's strength came from humility and love, forces more potent than any curse. The spell that best symbolizes this inner discipline is the Patronus charm. Expecto Patronum is not merely an incantation, it is an act of emotional purity. To summon a Patronus, one must reach for the brightest memory they possess, the one untouched by fear or doubt. For Harry Potter, that memory was the thought of his parents' love, the warmth of what he never truly had, yet deeply believed in. When he first conjured a fully formed Patronus in front of hundreds of Dementors by the lake, it was not power that saved him, but faith. The silvery stag that burst from his wand was the embodiment of hope. It was proof that light, even when fragile, can blind the darkness. Hermione Granger once struggled to understand why some students failed the Patronus lesson despite perfect pronunciation and wand movement. The answer was simple but profound. Magic responds to the wizard's essence. The dark arts feed on despair, anger, and desire for control. The Patronus, in contrast, demands surrender to joy and selflessness. It is one of the few spells that forces the caster to look inward. Lupin, who taught Harry this spell, knew that lesson well. His own life, marked by loneliness and the curse of lycanthropy, made him a living example of how one can fight darkness from within. When he said to Harry, "You are not weak." The Dementors affect you most because there are true horrors in your past. He was teaching that acknowledging pain is not weakness, it is the beginning of mastery over it. There were others in Hogwarts who learned this truth the hard way. Neville Longbottom, often dismissed as clumsy and shy, once faced his deepest fear during a defense against the dark arts class with Professor Lupin. The boggart that emerged from the wardrobe turned into the terrifying figure of Severus Snape. When Lupin instructed him to imagine Snape in his grandmother's hat and dress, Neville laughed, and so did the class. But what truly mattered was what happened inside Neville's heart. He faced humiliation and fear, but transformed them into strength. That simple lesson of courage became the foundation of the hero, who would later stand before Voldemort himself, holding the sword of Gryffindor. The study of dark arts defense is as much about the recognition of evil as it is about resisting it. Dolores Umbridge, who turned the class into a dull theoretical exercise, stripped it of its soul. Under her rule, students memorized rules but learned nothing about bravery. When she forbade practical lessons, Hermione founded Dumbledore's army to preserve the true spirit of the subject. The students practiced in the room of requirement, a space that responded to their deepest need, a refuge where light could still be trained in secret. There, spells became symbols of rebellion and belief. Harry's voice guiding them through the incantations was more than a lesson, it was a spark of resistance. "We're not just learning how to fight," he told them once. "We're learning why." Even Severus Snape, a man who lived between light and shadow, embodied the essence of this paradox. His life was one long act of defense against the darkness he had once embraced. He mastered the dark arts not to destroy others, but to understand how to protect. It is no coincidence that he became the final defense against the dark arts professor before the fall of Voldemort. Snape's knowledge was unmatched because he had looked into the abyss and chosen to turn away. When he cast his Patronus, a silver doe, the same as Lily Potter's, it was not an act of magic, but of love. "Always," he said once, and that word alone defeated the darkness within him more than any spell could. The struggle against dark forces is exhausting not because the spells are hard, but because they reveal what one truly is. When Harry faced the Horcruxes, he learned that darkness could take many shapes: greed, envy, fear of death. Each Horcrux demanded not a wand duel but a test of conscience. Ron Weasley, consumed by jealousy under the influence of the locket, learned how fragile loyalty can be when poisoned by insecurity. Hermione, though brilliant, was powerless against curses that targeted emotion rather than intellect. The war against Voldemort was not a series of battles, it was a mirror held before every heart. Defense against the dark arts, therefore, is a form of moral alchemy. It transforms weakness into wisdom. Luna Lovegood, whose dreamy calm often confused her classmates, understood this better than most. She could see thestrals, creatures visible only to those who had witnessed death, and yet she never feared them. Her acceptance of life's shadows made her immune to many of the manipulations that broke others. In her quiet way, she practiced the truest form of defense, compassion. To face the darkness, she taught by example, one must not hate it, but understand where it comes from. Throughout Hogwarts history, the position of defense against the dark arts professor was cursed, a symbol that darkness cannot be taught lightly. From Quirrell, whose greed made him a host to Voldemort, to Lockhart, who turned defense into vanity, the failures of these teachers showed how easily arrogance opens the door to evil. Yet, paradoxically, the subject also produced the bravest warriors, those who learned from pain rather than denied it. The curse on the post itself seemed to remind the world that light must always fight for survival. In the end, every spell in this field is a reflection of a simple truth. Darkness is not defeated by denying it, but by shining brighter. When Harry entered the Forbidden Forest to face death, his wand lowered, he carried no defensive charm. Yet in that moment, he embodied everything he had learned about defense. His willingness to sacrifice himself was the ultimate shield, born not of fear, but of love, the same force that once protected him as a baby from Voldemort's curse. Lily Potter's sacrifice was the most ancient magic of all, the first and final lesson of true defense. This is why even the most advanced charms and counter-curses pale before the power of a pure heart. No library, not even the restricted section, can teach what Dumbledore called the power of love. It is invisible, unquantifiable, and yet it bends the darkest curses. Voldemort, with all his brilliance, never understood this. His obsession with immortality blinded him to the truth that the most powerful defense is selflessness. His downfall was not due to weaker spells, but to an absence of light within. So when young witches and wizards gather in the dim classroom of defense against the dark arts, wand tips glowing faintly in the dark, they are not merely learning incantations, they are testing their souls. Each protego they cast, each patronus they attempt, is a small defiance against despair. The room smells of parchment and courage, of fear mixed with determination. Somewhere behind them stands the legacy of countless wizards who learned that the greatest weapon against darkness is not power, but purity of spirit. And as the light from their wands fills the room, even for a moment the shadows retreat, reminding them all that the true battle is not won by strength, but by the light that refuses to die. Number 21. Dark spells can infect the wizard. In the world of Harry Potter, magic is not merely a tool. It is a living force that responds to the intentions and emotions of the one who wields it. Nowhere is this truth more evident than in the realm of the dark arts, that shadowy, forbidden branch of magic that draws power from pain, domination, and death. Those who dare to use it soon discover that the darkness is never satisfied with obedience alone. It demands devotion, corrupting both body and soul, until the line between the caster and the curse fades away completely. The most striking characteristic of the dark arts is how intimately they bind themselves to their master. Unlike defensive or healing magic, which dissipates once the spell is cast, dark magic lingers. It seeps into the veins of the wizard, reshaping not only his magical signature but his very essence. Every use deepens the connection, creating invisible chains between the wizard's will and the energy he has unleashed. This is why so many who begin their journey out of curiosity or desperation end up enslaved by the very forces they sought to control. Magic leaves traces, Professor Dumbledore once warned Harry. That simple truth reveals more than it seems. Every incantation leaves a mark, not only in the world but on the one who performs it. For those who dabble in the dark arts, these traces accumulate, altering the wizard's aura, the invisible field that defines his magical identity. In ordinary spellwork, the aura brightens with use. In dark spellwork, it darkens, grows heavier, more oppressive. Sensitive wizards can feel such energy in a room where a dark wizard has cast a curse, a kind of cold residue that refuses to fade. There are many recorded instances in magical history where a wizard's prolonged use of dark enchantments has resulted in physical transformation. The most infamous of these, of course, is Lord Voldemort himself. Once a handsome student named Tom Marvolo Riddle, his experiments with the darkest branches of sorcery slowly consumed him. As he split his soul through the creation of Horcruxes, his features twisted beyond recognition. His skin became pale as bone, his eyes took on the red gleam of a serpent, and even his voice, once smooth and charming, turned to a hiss that seemed to echo with more than one tone. He was no longer fully human, a living testament to how dark magic corrupts the vessel that contains it. But Voldemort's case, as extraordinary as it is, was not unique. Other wizards who served under him showed similar symptoms, though on a lesser scale. The Death Eaters were known for their sallow complexions, the haunted look in their eyes, and the stiffness of their movements. These were not simply effects of fear or guilt. They were the physical manifestations of living too long in the shadow of darkness. Their bodies bore the subtle fingerprints of the curses they had cast, their magical energy perpetually resonating with cruelty and bloodshed. One of the most revealing examples of this infection is the case of Professor Quirinus Quirrell. When he first appeared at Hogwarts, he was timid and scholarly, more interested in books than power. Yet after his ill-fated journey into the forests of Albania, everything about him changed. According to Dumbledore, Quirrell had gone there seeking knowledge and returned a servant of Voldemort. His speech stammered not from shyness, but from the internal battle between his fading will and the parasitic influence that now shared his body. His once mild eyes grew dull and sunken, and a nervous tremor haunted his hands. Voldemort, Dumbledore later explained to Harry, was still so weak that he could not take true form. He possessed Quirrell, who was weak-minded and willing. This possession, however, was more than a matter of control. It was a fusion, a blending of the professor's body with the Dark Lord's cursed soul. The result was horrifying. Quirrell's very flesh became an instrument of darkness, his skin so corrupted that even a touch from someone as pure-hearted as Harry Potter could burn him to ash. That moment in the final chambers beneath Hogwarts was the ultimate demonstration of what happens when a man becomes a host for evil. The idea that magic could infect its wielder is not metaphorical but literal. Dark magic thrives on emotion, particularly on fear, hatred, and pain. When a wizard channels such emotions repeatedly, they become part of his magical pattern. The heart hardens, empathy withers, and the pleasure of destruction replaces the thrill of creation. This is why even seemingly small acts, The Cruciatus curse, for instance, leave invisible scars on the caster. Bellatrix, Lestrange's maniacal delight when torturing her victims, was not simply madness, it was addiction. The energy of the curse fed on her cruelty, magnifying it until she became little more than a vessel of chaos. There are whispers among auras that the killing curse, Avada Kedavra, changes the wizard most of all. The words themselves are simple, yet the intent behind them must be absolute, to destroy life without hesitation or remorse. Repeated use of this spell has been known to erode a person's emotional core, numbing them to suffering. It is said that after his first killing, even Tom Riddle paused, but by the time he rose as Lord Voldemort, murder had become to him as effortless as breathing. The curse did not merely take the lives of others, it devoured his own humanity. Throughout magical history, scholars from both Hogwarts and Durmstrang have debated whether the darkness corrupts by its own will, or whether it is simply a mirror reflecting the soul of the caster. Some believe that dark magic is a conscious force, an ancient remnant of primal chaos that hungers for living hosts. Others see it as an amplification of human weakness, a current of energy that takes the shape of whatever emotion fuels it. In either case, the outcome remains the same. The more one uses it, the less one remains oneself. Even Snape, who was perhaps the most complex practitioner of the dark arts in living memory, bore its marks. Though he turned from Voldemort and served a higher purpose, the remnants of his past lingered in every line of his face. His movements were economical, precise, but always tense, as though he was constantly suppressing something beneath the surface. His voice, cold and deliberate, carried the trace of one who had walked too long through shadows. Snape was proof that redemption was possible, but never without scars. It is often said that the wand chooses the wizard, but when it comes to dark magic, the opposite seems true. Dark spells choose their master, or rather, they consume him. Ancient texts stored in the restricted section of the Hogwarts library describe curses that grow stronger each time they are cast, feeding on the life force of the one who wields them. Some wizards, obsessed with mastery, continue to use them even as their health fades, their voices deepen, their eyes blacken, and their sleep becomes restless, haunted by whispers. The spell becomes part of their identity, whispering promises of greater power, if only they surrender a little more of themselves. Dark magic, unlike light, does not end with the death of its caster. It leaves echoes. These echoes linger in places where atrocities have occurred. Battlefields, torture chambers, or even ordinary rooms tainted by hatred. The Department of Mysteries once recorded that such residual energy can cause spontaneous magical phenomena, objects moving without cause, whispers in the dark, sudden chills. These are not ghosts but the remnants of emotion, as if the darkness refuses to let go of the world it once touched. There is a haunting parallel between this magical infection and the concept of Horcruxes. To create one, a wizard must commit the most unnatural act of all, to tear his own soul by murder and imprison a fragment of it within an object. Voldemort, in doing this repeatedly, ensured his survival, but doomed his humanity. When Dumbledore described the condition of his soul as maimed beyond recognition, he was not speaking figuratively. Each act of murder and dark enchantment reshaped him, leaving him less a man and more a shadow. His obsession with immortality only revealed how much of life he had already lost. Even those who resist the corruption entirely are not untouched. Harry himself, though never a practitioner of dark arts, bore the scar of that power. When Voldemort's curse rebounded, it linked them, a living reminder that darkness, once released, leaves its mark. Throughout his years at Hogwarts, Harry occasionally felt that connection pulsing in his scar, pain, anger, flashes of vision. The bond between victim and aggressor was proof that dark magic can cross the boundaries of body and soul, binding fates together in ways no one can undo. And so every generation of wizards faces the same warning. The dark arts promise strength, control, and knowledge beyond imagination, but their price is always the same, the slow erosion of the self. Quirrell's trembling hands, Snape's haunted gaze, Voldemort's monstrous visage all tell the same story. Darkness is not a weapon to be wielded. It is a contagion, and the moment one embraces it, it begins to whisper, to hunger, and finally, to devour. Number 22. Some curses are invisible and slow. There was a kind of darkness in the magical world that never shouted, never flashed green light, and never left burn marks on the walls. It whispered instead. It hid in the corners of the human mind, in memories that turned uncertain, and in dreams that began to feel too real. Unlike the famous unforgivable curses, Avada Kedavra, Imperius, and Cruciatus, these spells did not announce themselves. They worked in silence, like slow poison, unnoticed until it was far too late. As Dumbledore once said, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are far more than our abilities." Yet what happens when one's very choices are quietly rewritten by a spell that blurs the borders between will and manipulation? The art of hidden curses, those that act gradually and invisibly, has long fascinated the darker minds of wizarding history. Ancient records, some nearly erased from the Hogwarts archives, tell of enchantments that fed not on pain, but on confusion. These were spells designed to erode clarity, to make a person forget why they had once cared, fought, or loved. Imagine a wizard who wakes up every morning slightly less sure of what matters, whose ambitions fade like mist in the morning sun. Such a person would never suspect a hex, for the curse would feel like nothing more than fatigue or melancholy. This is why dark magic of this kind was feared even more by some scholars than open violence. It was the corruption of identity itself. In the common rooms and corridors of Hogwarts, where students whispered tales of Slytherin's chamber, there was another legend less known but equally chilling. It spoke of a spell that Slytherin himself was rumoured to have used on rival founders to test their minds. According to this tale, Slytherin did not always strike with serpents or steel. Sometimes he preferred to let his opponents lose themselves. The curse, described in fragments within a crumbling medieval parchment found in the restricted section, was said to be cast not with words but with intention. It sowed forgetfulness, not of names or dates, but of purpose. A victim of such magic might look entirely unharmed, yet their sense of direction in life would fade, as though the compass of their soul had shattered. Some historians believe this ancient curse resurfaced centuries later in subtler forms. When Tom Riddle roamed the castle's dungeons as a boy, fascinated by the echoes of his ancestors' power, he spent long nights reading anything that mentioned Slytherin's secret art. It is said that he once remarked to Professor Slughorn, "There are forms of control far superior to fear." That statement, innocent on the surface, hides an understanding that power rooted in the mind is more durable than any chain. Voldemort, as he would later call himself, mastered the Imperius curse, yet he went beyond it, experimenting perhaps with enchantments that needed no visible spell work at all. There are signs that such hidden magic might have been used even in the time of the Second Wizarding War. Some victims who survived encounters with Death Eaters spoke of weeks of strange dreams, restlessness, and dread before realizing they had been manipulated. One former aura described how his confidence and memory deteriorated after capturing a masked follower of Voldemort. He was later told by healers at St. Mungo's that there were traces of empathic curse residue in his magical field, evidence of a charm designed to drain courage. Such spells, nearly impossible to detect, showed that the dark arts had evolved into psychological warfare. The very idea that a curse could act through sleep has terrified generations of wizards. The mind is not a book, to be opened at will and examined at leisure, Dumbledore once explained to Harry when teaching him occlumency. If the mind is not a book, then a dark spell that sneaks into its pages is a form of rewriting. Dream hexes were said to begin as simple recurring visions, often pleasant at first. But each night they grew more vivid, weaving illusions so convincing that the victim could no longer separate them from reality. Some witches of the 14th century claimed that these dreams whispered commands in familiar voices. A cursed person might awaken with the certainty that a false memory was true, and in that certainty act against their own will. In the 17th century, a wizard named Alaric Morn discovered a charm that spread through shared thought. He had been researching memory modification and accidentally crafted a spell that caused his apprentices to forget the very reason they had come to work with him. Within weeks, his entire household was wandering the countryside, unable to recall their own names. Morn vanished shortly after, leaving behind notes that simply read, "Intent corrupts creation." Many modern scholars now believe he had stumbled upon a forgotten branch of the same dark magic that began with Slytherin himself, a magic that thrived not on destruction, but on quiet dissolution. What makes these subtle curses particularly insidious is how easily they can hide behind ordinary emotions. A wizard, under the influence of such enchantment, may appear merely tired, indecisive, or withdrawn. In the Department of Mysteries, some unspeakables have proposed that certain ancient artifacts, mirrors, pendants, or portraits, carry echoes of such spells. They call them silent wards, objects that watch and whisper rather than strike. An unspeakable once wrote in a private note, later leaked to the Daily Prophet, "The most dangerous curse is the one you do not believe exists." It is a chilling thought that among the countless magical artifacts passed through Diagon Alley, some might still bear traces of forgotten control. There is one specific case often cited as an example, the Mirror of Erised. Though not inherently dark, its enchantment carries a warning about the slow corruption of desire. It does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live, Dumbledore told Harry. Yet, had a darker mind designed it, the mirror's ability to ensnare through longing could easily have become a weapon. A similar artifact, now lost, was once described in the Book of Serpents, a mirror that showed not what one desired, but what one feared losing. Those who gazed into it too long became consumed with anxiety, unable to distinguish between reality and vision. Some historians suspect it may have been one of Slytherin's early creations, crafted not to harm the body, but to enslave the mind through fear. There are also whispers of a spell known as Somnus Obscurus, rumoured to have been revived by certain followers of Grindelwald. It was said to induce sleep filled with false prophecies. Victims awoke convinced they had glimpsed the future, and in trying to avoid it, fulfilled the very destiny the spell intended. This paradoxical form of manipulation echoes the twisted genius of those who practiced slow curses, control without confrontation. If true, Somnus Obscurus would stand as one of the most refined examples of dark psychological enchantment, a direct heir to Slytherin's subtle craft. The great irony of these arts is that their power depends on subtlety. Unlike a duel in the Great Hall, there are no witnesses, no defensive charms to raise. The victim's own thoughts become the battlefield. Even the best-trained minds, such as Severus Snape's, could struggle against such invisible invasion. Snape's mastery of occlumency may have saved him countless times from the probing mind of the Dark Lord, yet one wonders how much of his cold demeanor came from years spent shielding his consciousness from invisible assaults. The dark arts leave traces not only on the flesh but on the soul, layers of armor forged through constant vigilance. In some old Slytherin family traditions, there existed an oath called Vigil Mentis, the watch of the mind. It was taught as a protection against the slow curses, implying that their existence was not mere legend. A descendant of one such family once confided to an aura that his ancestors performed this ritual every full moon, chanting verses designed to anchor the will. It seems that even those who practiced dark magic feared being victims of subtler powers. There is always someone darker, someone who has found a way to turn thought itself into a weapon. Even in the modern age, remnants of such practices surface occasionally in unexpected places. A cursed locket recovered after Voldemort's fall showed signs of enchantment that did more than emit dark energy. It manipulated emotion. It whispered, eroded courage, magnified doubt. Ron Weasley, who carried it for weeks, later admitted that it made you think things you didn't want to think. Though crafted by dark rituals involving a fragment of soul, its method, slow corrosion of will, follows the same ancient pattern traced back to Slytherin's philosophy. True darkness, it seems, rarely arrives with thunder. It comes quietly, in whispers. If the essence of magic is intent, then the essence of dark magic is persistence. A quick curse kills, a slow one converts. The latter requires patience and intelligence, the qualities that Salazar Slytherin valued most. That may explain why his legacy endures not in brute force but in cunning. Greatness inspires both envy and fear, Dumbledore once told Harry, and nowhere is that more evident than in the legacy of those who wielded hidden power. Slytherin's methods were not about destruction, they were about transformation through control, a control so complete that the victim might thank their tormentor for it. Today, few would dare to experiment with such spells. The Ministry of Magic lists them among unclassifiable forbidden enchantments, and even research into their nature is discouraged. Yet their allure persists in rumor and curiosity. For every wizard who seeks light, there will always be one who wonders what lies in the shadow of the mind. And as long as that question remains, the world of magic will never be entirely free of those unseen curses that work quietly, invisibly, and irresistibly until the very thought of resistance fades away. Number 23. Some family curses still remain active. In the shadowed corners of wizarding history, there are tales that the Ministry of Magic itself hesitates to record. They speak of curses not cast in anger or haste, but woven carefully, intentionally, into the very veins of families, binding their descendants in invisible chains. These are the ancient family curses, remnants of a time when bloodlines were both power and prison. The Department of Mysteries still whispers about such enchantments, tracing their origins to the earliest wizards who experimented with the limits of magical inheritance. Unlike simple jinxes or hexes, these maledictions do not fade with time. They evolve, passing silently from generation to generation, reshaping destinies long after their creators have turned to dust. Among the most infamous examples lies the story of the Gaunt family, the last known descendants of Salazar Slytherin himself. Once proud of their pure-blood heritage, they became prisoners of their own arrogance and obsession. Their bloodline, once royal among wizards, descended into madness, violence, and decay. The walls of their shack, hidden deep in Little Hangleton, bore witness to centuries of inbreeding, cruelty, and the slow rot of a once great name. They were a nest of nastiness, Dumbledore once remarked, describing them as proud and poor and mad. The curse that haunted them was not merely poverty or misfortune, it was the dark echo of the founder's own ambition, twisted through time. The Gaunts were bound to the same traits that defined their ancestor: pride, cunning, and the thirst for domination. But in their case, these qualities no longer inspired greatness, they consumed. Marvolo Gaunt, a bitter old man clutching the Slytherin locket like a relic, lived with the delusion that blood was all that mattered. His son Morfin inherited not wisdom, but fury, a mind so fractured it could no longer separate hatred from instinct. And Merope, the daughter who dared to love a Muggle, became the victim of generations of cruelty. When she died giving birth to her son, Tom Riddle, the family curse seemed to find its final expression. That child would grow into the darkest wizard of modern times, proving that the sins of the fathers often do not die. They transform. Blood magic was at the root of it all. Ancient wizards believed that the purity of one's bloodline could preserve magical strength. Yet paradoxically, it also preserved madness, obsession, and the echoes of every dark deed performed in the family's name. Blood carries memory. In the hidden texts of the Department of Mysteries, unspeakables record that certain enchantments, crafted centuries ago, were designed not only to protect families, but to bind them. These spells tethered the spirit of a clan to a particular virtue or flaw, amplifying it through each generation. When darkness was part of that heritage, the result could be catastrophic. One of the oldest surviving records describes a curse known as the Vein of Ashes, believed to have been placed upon a Welsh wizarding family during the Middle Ages. Every firstborn in that line was fated to lose what they most loved before their 21st birthday. Scholars traced the pattern: a son who watched his betrothed perish in a fire, another who saw his child vanish into thin air, and a daughter whose own heart stopped from grief. The curse could not be broken, for it was sealed with blood willingly given, a pact between the caster and the very essence of life. Centuries later, the family's last heir entered the Department of Mysteries, begging the unspeakables to end the suffering. They tried everything from counter-curses to sacrificial charms, yet nothing worked. The curse had become part of the blood itself. Even Albus Dumbledore, known for his unmatched understanding of ancient magic, admitted that some spells run deeper than intent, beyond the reach of reason. In one of his private letters, preserved in the archives of Hogwarts, he wrote, "When magic intertwines with blood, it ceases to be a spell, it becomes a legacy. Such legacies could never be erased without destroying the very lineage they inhabit." The Department of Mysteries, in its quiet laboratories, continues to experiment with the power of inherited magic, attempting to separate the physical from the spiritual. Some claim they have partially succeeded, others say their work only awakens what was meant to sleep. The fascination with family curses has always lingered among scholars and dark wizards alike. To some, they represent the ultimate form of control, a spell that outlives its caster. To others, they are the cautionary tales of power misused. The Gaunts, however, were not alone. The Rosiers, an old pure-blood family aligned with the dark arts, were said to suffer from a curse of their own. Every generation produced one child who could not love. No potion of amortentia, no spell of affection ever stirred their hearts. It was whispered that one ancestor had bargained with a demon for eternal loyalty to his house, sacrificing all capacity for tenderness. Decades later, the family's descendants found themselves drawn to Voldemort not by chance, but by nature. The curse of the Rosier was not as visible as that of the Gaunts, but it was no less real. Emotional emptiness can be as deadly as madness. Historians of magic observed that curses tied to the soul rarely manifest as physical ailments. They erode the mind and heart instead. The dark arts, as Hermione Granger once noted while researching for her book, Witchcraft and Its Shadows, do not merely corrupt, they colonize. A cursed family carries within it the shadow of a choice made long ago, and every new generation must wrestle with ghosts they never invited. Magical law has long debated whether such curses can be legally recognized as a cause of harm. The Wizengamot during the late 1800s attempted to pass an act regulating the use of blood-bound enchantments, but enforcement proved impossible. Family curses are personal, secretive, and often tied to rituals lost in time. One case from those proceedings involved the Montrose lineage, a Scottish clan whose members were mysteriously struck mute upon turning 16. When a ministry investigator traced the phenomenon back to a single ancestor accused of betraying Merlin's covenant, the evidence was already centuries cold. The curse had outlived any record of its creation. Researchers from the Department of Mysteries have developed classification scales to study such phenomena. Level 1 curses can be lifted through repentance and cleansing rituals, while Level 5, like those tied to the Gaunts, are considered ancestrally sealed. The latter resist all known counter-magic. These are the curses that shape history. They explain why certain wizarding families fall from grace, why their names fade, and why, despite their power, they end in ruin. The blood remembers. In recent years, scholars such as Bathilda Bagshot have speculated that the persistence of certain family curses might explain the rise and fall of pure-blood ideology. The very obsession with magical purity, ironically, ensured the survival of corruption within those bloodlines. By isolating themselves, these families amplified their inherited flaws. As Bagshot wrote, "The wall that keeps the world out also keeps the darkness in." It is a poetic truth, one that history confirms again and again. Blood magic, though outlawed, has never been truly forgotten. Some unspeakables still whisper of experimental reversals involving ritual purification through ancient runes and self-sacrifice. Yet the risks are extreme. Those who attempt to sever a blood curse often die in the process, consumed by the backlash of magic seeking balance. There are records, hidden from public access, of at least 5 such deaths within the last century. Still, the work continues. Every generation of magical scholars seems haunted by the same question: can destiny, once written in blood, ever be rewritten? There are those who claim to have found partial remedies. A surviving journal from Ignatia Wildsmith, the inventor of flu powder, hints that certain magical pathways, especially those tied to elemental energies, can weaken the connection between blood and curse. She wrote of a ritual fire that burns not the flesh, but the past. Yet no one has successfully replicated her experiment. Others believe that love, the oldest magic of all, may hold the key. Dumbledore himself once suggested that Merope Gaunt's act of genuine love, however brief, might have broken her family's chain of suffering had she lived longer. Her death left the curse unresolved, and in her son it reached its dreadful perfection. In the years following Voldemort's fall, many magical families began re-evaluating their pasts. The rise of new genealogical magic has allowed witches and wizards to trace spiritual imprints across generations. Some have discovered signs of dormant curses, small misfortunes that echo through history like faint ripples in time. Healers at St. Mungos now treat not only the wounds of the body but also those of the blood. They study lineages as carefully as illnesses, for the two have become intertwined. And so the story continues. The Gaunts may be gone, but their lesson remains etched into the fabric of wizarding lore. Magic, when bound to the heart, becomes a force of creation, but when bound to blood, it becomes a prison. There are spells older than Hogwarts itself, still pulsing beneath the skin of certain families, invisible yet unrelenting. They are the whispers of pride, greed, betrayal, echoes that time cannot silence. The dark arts are seductive, Snape once warned his students. They leave traces, sometimes on the soul, sometimes in the family. It is said that in the deepest chamber of the Department of Mysteries lies a door that has never been opened, a door that hums with ancient energy. Some believe it leads to the origin of all magical inheritance, where the first curse was born. The unspeakables guard it in silence, studying runes that predate human language. And though they may never speak of what they find, one truth resounds throughout the wizarding world. Some curses are not meant to be broken, they are meant to be remembered, so that magic itself never forgets the price of darkness. Number 24. Dark potions are as dangerous as spells. Dark magic has always carried an air of dread, whispered about in corridors and hidden within forbidden tomes. Yet when wizards think of the dark arts, their minds usually turn to curses, the Cruciatus, the Imperius, or the fatal Avada Kedavra. What many fail to realize is that the true essence of dark power often lies not in the spoken word, but in the simmering depths of a cauldron. Dark potions, thick, glistening, and alive with sinister purpose, have destroyed more minds and bodies than many curses combined. Unlike a spell which requires a direct act of will, a potion can enslave or annihilate quietly, drop by drop, while the victim is unaware of the danger. Among all who ever studied this forbidden craft, none understood the subtlety of such magic better than Severus Snape. Known publicly as a professor of potions, and later as headmaster of Hogwarts, his reputation concealed a deeper mastery of alchemy and the shadowed arts of brewing. Snape's shelves, hidden behind protective wards, contained manuscripts written in cramped, black ink, full of symbols that even the most skilled potion makers could not decipher. Many of these were not copied from any book. They were his own inventions. To the untrained eye, they looked like ordinary notes, but to those who understood the delicate balance between ingredient and intent, they were a map of obsession. It was said that Snape's skill was born not only from knowledge but from pain. Each potion he created seemed to mirror the turmoil within him. The draught of living death, which he perfected beyond even Slughorn's version, became his personal mark, a potion so strong that a single drop could sink the drinker into a sleep that mimicked death. Yet Snape went further. He experimented with ingredients that others dared not touch: powdered manticore spine, preserved banshee tears, and the shadowy essence of fluxweed harvested during a lunar eclipse. Such materials were banned by the Ministry, not only for their toxicity but for their ability to alter the human soul. There was one potion in particular that existed only in whispers among those who studied the dark arts, a creation that blurred the line between alchemy and black magic. It was rumored to have no name, no recipe, and no antidote. According to an old story from the Hogwarts dungeons, Snape once brewed a potion capable of slowly consuming the soul of its victim while leaving the body perfectly alive. The victim would continue to breathe, to walk, and to speak, but the light behind their eyes would fade day by day until they were little more than an empty shell. This was not a mere poison, it was a curse in liquid form. The story began, as the tale goes, after Snape's years as a Death Eater, when he returned to Hogwarts under Dumbledore's watch. He was haunted by what he had done, tormented by the memory of Lily Potter's death. In his solitude, he turned to the only thing he truly controlled, the art of potion making. He spent nights locked in his chamber, the air thick with fumes of asphodel and wormwood, ingredients that symbolized sorrow and death. Students occasionally reported faint traces of a strange metallic scent in the corridors, like iron and ashes. Snape never explained. It is said that this potion, which some later called the essence of remorse, was never intended to harm another. Snape had created it to understand the boundary between life and the soul, a philosophical experiment born from grief. But as every alchemist knows, intent cannot always control consequence. The first time he tested the brew on a captured rat, its eyes clouded over within hours, and its movements slowed until it stood still, breathing shallowly but showing no awareness of its surroundings. When he tried to reverse the process, the antidotes failed. The creature lived for days, alive but without will, as though its soul had been drained away. Snape reportedly destroyed the remainder of the potion, yet some believed he never truly discarded it. Years later, when Harry Potter confronted the truth about Snape's loyalty, he glimpsed memories in the pensieve that suggested a man living between worlds, half bound to Dumbledore's cause, half chained to his own guilt. It is not difficult to imagine that a wizard with such contradictions might create something that embodied both redemption and destruction. "There is no good and evil," Snape once told his students. "There is only power, and those too weak to seek it." Though he said it quoting Voldemort's ideology, the words held a strange resonance with his own life. In his potions, power was not loud or flamboyant. It was silent, patient, waiting beneath the surface. Even the best-known dark potions bear the same duality. The draught of despair, created centuries before Snape, was once used by wizards to erase memory and emotion in prisoners, reducing them to obedient husks. Felix Felicis, often seen as a lucky potion, can also destroy a person's life if consumed excessively, leading to recklessness, mania, or death. Amortentia, the most powerful love potion in existence, can enslave the will of another, stripping away the victim's ability to choose whom they love. It is impossible to manufacture or imitate love, Professor Slughorn once warned, but what Amortentia creates is an obsession, not affection. These are not simple concoctions, they are chains disguised as gifts. The line between potion and curse has always been fragile. A curse demands energy but fades once it is cast. A potion endures, it can be stored, multiplied, hidden, even consumed by an innocent who never knew the danger. The difference between the two lies only in their delivery. A curse attacks from the outside, a potion invades from within. That is what makes dark potions so terrifying. Once swallowed, there is no shield, no counter-curse, no wand movement to undo it. The battle is fought inside the body and mind where no spell can reach. Snape himself acknowledged this silent cruelty. When he lectured students about poisons, his tone carried an undercurrent of warning. He described how even a drop of certain brews could twist the body beyond recognition, how mandrake and nightshade, when combined incorrectly, could paralyze not only muscles, but thought. "Fame isn't everything," he once said coldly to Harry. "The art of potion-making requires subtlety and precision. It is the difference between a masterpiece and a massacre." Few students understood how literal his words were. In the years following the Second Wizarding War, the Department of Mysteries conducted quiet research into confiscated potion manuscripts once belonging to known Death Eaters. Among the recovered items was a damaged parchment attributed to Snape. Though most of the formula had been charred beyond recognition, one legible line read, "The essence of guilt cannot be destroyed, only distilled." Scholars debated whether this referred to a philosophical note or an actual potion, but for those who knew Snape's work, it suggested something far darker, an attempt to capture emotion itself in physical form. The danger of dark potions is not merely their physical harm, they reflect the deepest desires and fears of the one who brews them. To create a potion that controls minds, the brewer must understand manipulation. To brew one that steals life, the brewer must accept death. The cauldron becomes a mirror, amplifying the soul of its master. Snape's cauldron, therefore, was both laboratory and confessional, a place where guilt took form and power found expression. The fumes that rose from it were not just chemical vapors, they were memories, regrets, fragments of conscience turned to mist. There is one passage from the Half-Blood Prince that best captures this truth. "The mind is not a book, to be opened at will and examined at leisure." Snape spoke these words about occlumency, but they could just as well describe potion-making. Every potion is a story of control, an attempt to command forces that resist command. When a wizard brews, they are not just mixing ingredients, they are imposing order upon chaos. But dark potions do not yield easily, they fight back, they demand something in exchange. This is why many masters of the art went mad or vanished. The alchemist Ashwinder, for example, perished in his own experiment while trying to brew the elixir of obedience, a potion meant to subdue an army through scent alone. The fumes burned his lungs and left him trapped in his laboratory, unable to breathe or die. Others, like the infamous wizard Mulpepper, poisoned entire villages by testing brews that distorted time perception. Each believed they were mastering darkness, yet in truth they were consumed by it. Snape, however, survived because he understood restraint. He danced on the edge but rarely crossed it. His genius lay not in how many dark potions he could create, but in how many he chose not to. His notebooks reveal half-finished recipes, each halted at the moment when a single drop would have turned innovation into monstrosity. That discipline, born of pain, loss, and love, separated him from true darkness. He knew that once a potion takes hold of the brewer's heart, it brews itself. And so the next time one thinks of the dark arts, the mind should not stop at the flick of a wand or the flash of green light. True darkness can hide in the quiet bubbling of a cauldron, in the reflection of a silver ladle, in the steady rhythm of a stirrer, counting clockwise turns. Severus Snape understood that better than anyone. The power to kill may come from a curse, but the power to erase a soul, that belongs to the art of potions. Number 25. Portraits can carry dark enchantments. In the magical world of Harry Potter, portraits are more than just painted likenesses. They are echoes of life, capable of speech, memory, and interaction. Most witches and wizards see them as harmless, or even comforting reminders of those who have passed on. In Hogwarts, the fat lady guards Gryffindor Tower, while Sir Cadogan once stood in her place, cheerfully challenging students to duels of honor. Yet beneath this familiar and often comic aspect lies a lesser-known truth, one that even Albus Dumbledore hinted at when he spoke of magic that binds a fragment of oneself into the painted form. It is said that a portrait can be made into something far darker than a sentient guardian. When crafted by a dark wizard, it can become a vessel, not merely for memory, but for malice itself. Few dare to speak of the portraits created with sinister intent. Most were destroyed during the early years of the Ministry of Magic, when new laws were passed to regulate enchanted objects. Yet traces of these cursed paintings have remained, whispered about in families whose histories stretch back to the Middle Ages. One particularly chilling tale tells of a portrait known as the Whispering Lady of Ashcombe Hall. Painted in 1623 by the reclusive artist Lysander Thrall, the portrait depicted a serene witch with pale eyes and silver hair, her expression hauntingly calm. Over the centuries, servants and guests reported hearing the lady's voice after midnight, softly calling their names, sometimes offering comfort, sometimes warning of doom. But in 1785, the last owner of Ashcombe Hall, Lord Corvinus Flint, was found dead in front of her frame, his face frozen in terror, the portrait's painted eyes glinting red. The ministry investigation that followed was inconclusive, but one line from the official report still circulates among magical historians. The pigment of the portrait was found to contain traces of powdered basilisk scale and human ash. That discovery gave rise to a chilling hypothesis that Lysander Thrall, who vanished after the painting's completion, had not merely created art, but had infused it with a fragment of his own dark essence. Scholars later compared this to the creation of a Horcrux, though less powerful and more unstable. Dumbledore himself once remarked, "Magic leaves shadows where souls have been wounded," and it seems that such portraits are among those shadows. In Hogwarts, portraits play a vital role in the school's living architecture. They deliver messages, observe students, and even participate in battles. Phineas Nigellus Black, the proud and sardonic former headmaster, often appeared in multiple locations at once, able to report from his portrait in Grimmauld Place to Dumbledore's office in the castle. He served as a conduit of knowledge, and perhaps of secrets. Yet it was Dumbledore who quietly introduced a little-known regulation during his tenure as headmaster. All new portraits created for Hogwarts walls were to be inspected by the Department of Magical Artifacts before being hung. Officially, this was to ensure the integrity of enchantments. Unofficially, it was to protect the castle from darker influences that could manipulate students and staff alike. The fear was not unfounded. In 1892, a strange occurrence shook the school. A newly commissioned portrait of a medieval potioneer, Mervyn the Alchemist, began whispering formulas to students in their sleep. At first, they seemed harmless, simple recipes for sleeping draughts and pain relievers. But soon the whispers changed. One student, a Ravenclaw named Octavia Burke, claimed that the portrait instructed her to mix powdered moonstone with essence of nightshade, a combination that nearly cost her her life. When the portrait was examined, it was discovered that the original canvas had been painted over another image. Beneath Mervyn's smiling face, experts found the faint outline of an unknown figure cloaked in black. The enchantments binding the portrait were so strong that it took 3 auras and 2 professors to destroy it. Hogwarts has always been a repository of ancient magic, and its portraits are no exception. Many were created long before the school adopted any formal rules about enchantment. Salazar Slytherin, whose skill in dark magic was unrivaled, is believed to have painted or commissioned several works imbued with protective, or possibly manipulative, spells. Some historians believe that one such painting once hung in the Slytherin common room, a stern wizard with serpent-green eyes rumoured to test the loyalty of young students. The portrait vanished in the 17th century, though a record in the restricted section of the library mentions a talking likeness that asked riddles about purity and power. Whether this portrait was truly linked to Slytherin remains unknown, but the very idea sent chills through generations of Hogwarts students. Magic, when channeled through art, has a peculiar nature. Unlike curses cast directly, enchantments embedded in objects tend to evolve. They absorb traces of emotion from those around them, just as a mirror reflects more than one face over time. This explains why some portraits in the wizarding world develop unpredictable personalities. When dark magic is added to this process, the result can be catastrophic. The portrait becomes not a reflection, but a parasite, feeding on fear, resentment, or sorrow. In some rare cases, victims have reported seeing their own reflection flicker briefly in the painted surface, as if the portrait was imitating their expression to gain influence over them. The connection between art and soul was something even Voldemort understood, though he expressed it in the most horrifying way. When he fragmented his soul into Horcruxes, he proved that a human spirit could indeed be divided and bound to objects. Portraits, however, offered a subtler and more ancient channel. Unlike a Horcrux, a portrait could feign innocence. It could watch, listen, and whisper from its frame without revealing its true intent. During the Second Wizarding War, Aurors investigating abandoned manors of Death Eaters discovered several paintings that resisted destruction. In one, the painted figure of a hooded man screamed when the canvas was set alight, a sound so real that one Auror resigned the next day. One of the most intriguing cases is tied to the House of Gaunt, the bloodline from which Voldemort himself descended. Among the ruins of their home near Little Hangleton, a decayed portrait was found in 1999, its frame twisted and blackened, its surface covered by mould. Yet the portrait's remnants still whispered. Magical archaeologists who studied it reported hearing faint phrases in Parseltongue, phrases that matched lines found in Slytherin's own recorded writings. Whether this was mere coincidence or proof of some lingering link between blood, language, and enchantment remains a matter of fierce debate. Not all cursed portraits, however, were made intentionally. Sometimes the corruption came after the painter's death. In the 18th century, a series of portraits by the famous witch artist Clorinda Voss began to display signs of sentience long after her passing. Her family claimed that she had experimented with spells that allowed her art to feel the air of the room. Over time, those portraits began to react to strong emotion: tears, laughter, even anger. A rumor spread that one of the paintings, The Boy with the Lute, began crying blood when its owner was caught practicing necromancy. By the time the ministry intervened, most of Clorinda's works had vanished into private collections, never to be traced again. Within Hogwarts, the professors have long known to treat portraits with wary respect. Even seemingly friendly ones, such as the garrulous Sir Nicholas's acquaintances or the chatty fat monks along the staircases, are bound by enchantments that few fully understand. When Harry Potter once noted how Dumbledore's portrait appeared wise and helpful even after death, it raised questions in the Department of Mysteries about whether part of Dumbledore's essence lingered there. Could a portrait, they wondered, serve as a vessel for wisdom, or as a cage for a fragment of soul? The difference, as one unspeakable noted, depends only on intent. Intent, that is the dividing line between memory and possession. A portrait created to preserve knowledge can become a teacher. One painted to preserve control becomes a tyrant. That is why, to this day, the enchantments used in portrait making remain closely guarded. Only certified magical artists are permitted to perform the final binding spell, known as imago vivens, a charm said to breathe thought into colour. When performed improperly, or wickedly, that breath can twist into something far less human. At night, when Hogwarts grows silent and the torches flicker in their sconces, the portraits whisper softly to one another. Most of these conversations are harmless: complaints about drafts, gossip about students, or recitations of heroic deeds. But sometimes, when a portrait has been hung for centuries, and the paint begins to crack, one might catch a faint murmur unlike the rest. It will not gossip or laugh. It will speak of the past in tones too cold, too knowing. It might call a name no one remembers, and if one listens too long, they might feel the same chill that young Octavia Burke once described, as though the painting was staring back through me. Such stories remind even the bravest witches and wizards that magic, for all its beauty, carries shadows. A portrait, like a spell, is shaped by the heart of its maker, and just as love can linger beyond death, so can hatred. In a world where portraits walk, talk, and remember, perhaps the greatest danger lies not in what they show, but in what, or who, still lives behind the paint. Number 26. Dark books can influence the reader. There is a strange and unsettling magic that dwells not in wands but in words. Among the many dangers of the dark arts, perhaps the most insidious are the books that whisper from the shadows of forgotten shelves. To the untrained wizard, they seem harmless. Old parchment, fading ink, and a faint scent of dust and candle wax. But to those who know, to those who have seen what they can do, these books are as alive as the curses they contain. Some say they breathe, others insist they dream, and the rare few who dared to read them often found that the pages stared back. It was not only the spells within them that were dangerous. The very act of reading a dark book was a risk, a subtle spell of its own. Tom Riddle once wrote in a thin, innocent-looking diary, "I can show you everything." Those words, as simple as they seemed, were a trap. Ginny Weasley discovered this too late, pouring her heart into the diary, only to have it slowly take her soul in return. That diary had no incantations written across its pages, no visible hexes or runes, but it possessed intent, the darkest form of enchantment. Its author had infused it with fragments of himself, a piece of his will, and that was enough to make it think, speak, and manipulate. A book like that does not merely tell stories, it writes them using the reader as ink. Yet Riddle's diary was only a faint echo of what the truly ancient grimoires once held. In the restricted section of the Hogwarts library, chained behind thick iron bars, there were volumes that even Dumbledore himself handled with gloves and silence. One of them, Magic Moste Evil, contained a brief mention of Horcruxes, a word so foul that it was written only once and never explained. Hermione Granger later recalled, even the index refused to define it. The book itself seemed to shiver when touched, as if offended by curiosity. It is said that the author, an unknown warlock from the 14th century, bound the manuscript in his own skin so that no other could claim his knowledge without sharing his madness. There are accounts, whispered among historians of magic, of books that change when no one is looking. A French volume, titled Les Ténèbres de l'âme, was said to rearrange its text each night, ensuring that no reader could ever memorize its contents. Wizards who attempted to copy it found their quills bursting into black flame. Another, the Book of Veils, was rumoured to contain incantations for communing with spirits beyond the veil of death. Its pages were silver-grey, written in ink that shimmered like smoke. Every reader reported hearing faint voices behind them, calling their names. Those who ignored the voices did not finish the book. Those who answered were never seen again. The peculiar case of the Half-Blood Prince's Potions textbook provides perhaps the most famous modern example of a book that carried the spirit of its writer. When Harry Potter found that battered copy, the margins were filled with strange notes, corrections, and personal inventions. Among them was the spell Sectum Sempra, a curse so vicious it tore flesh like invisible blades. The book was more than annotated, it was possessed by the genius and bitterness of its former owner, Severus Snape. Each correction in the text revealed the mind of someone who despised imperfection, but also craved recognition. When Harry used the curse, it was as though he had momentarily become the author himself, channeling Snape's rage. "For enemies!" the prince had scrawled beside the spell. It was not a warning, it was an invitation. This connection between author and book is what makes dark literature so perilous. Writing in magic is not merely expression, it is a ritual act. The quill becomes a wand, the ink a conduit of the soul. When a dark wizard writes, he transfers not only his knowledge but his essence onto the parchment. That is why some tomes can sense fear or curiosity in the hands that touch them. It is why the grimoire of the Hollow Eye, kept once in the private collection of Borgin and Burke's, was said to open only for readers who had already committed an unforgivable curse. Otherwise, the book remained sealed, its cover cold as stone. There were librarians in the old wizarding world who dedicated their lives to guarding such artifacts. The most famous among them, Miranda Pritchard of Durmstrang, went mad after cataloguing the Chronicles of Morven. That book, written by an executioner of the Spanish Inquisition who had turned to necromancy, was rumoured to whisper prayers backward at midnight. Students who sneaked into her restricted archive reported seeing the book's cover pulse as if it had a heartbeat. When the archive was sealed after her death, the ministry found a single note in her handwriting. "The pages do not want to be read, they want to be remembered." In the darker corners of magical scholarship, there persists the legend of a secret library, one that no spell can reveal on purpose. It is said to drift between locations like a living ghost, appearing wherever magic has been abused. Some call it the Librarium Umbrae, the Library of Shadows. Its shelves are filled with tomes written by true masters of the dark arts: Salazar Slytherin, Herpo the Foul, Emmerich the Evil, and lesser-known warlocks whose names were erased from history. Each book, according to those who claim to have seen it, chooses its reader. It waits for someone whose desires or fears resonate with its contents. And once the match is made, the book ensures it will be opened. Imagine a young witch stumbling upon one of these volumes in an abandoned manor, drawn by the strange hum of magic. At first, the text might seem harmless, recipes for potions, old runes, forgotten incantations, but slowly as she reads, the ink begins to shift, revealing new sentences that were not there before. The language feels familiar, personal. It begins to whisper things she has never told anyone. That is how the dark books work, not through sudden curses, but through slow seduction. They feed on the reader's need to understand, to control, to become more than they are, and when the last page is turned, it is no longer clear who has read whom. In this sense, the boundary between a dark book and a cursed object is very thin. The Opus Maleficarum, a massive black tome stored deep in the Department of Mysteries, was sealed after an unspeakable vanished while studying it. The book reportedly documented every known curse, but also contained something more, a consciousness, an awareness of being read. It is said that when the unspeakable reached the section titled The Mirror of Self, the ink rose from the page and entered his eyes. The book closed itself gently, as if satisfied. No one has opened it since. The question that lingers among magical theorists is whether the corruption lies in the book or in the reader. A spell, after all, is only as dark as the intent behind it. When Hermione once asked, "Isn't it dangerous to read these things?" Dumbledore answered, "Understanding is never dangerous, only using what we understand." But could that be true when the knowledge itself hungers? What if understanding becomes the act that completes the curse? That paradox lies at the heart of every dark text, knowledge that reshapes the mind until it cannot tell whether it was chosen or consumed. Some claim that the Ministry of Magic hides more than it admits. The Department of Magical Accidents supposedly keeps a vault of confiscated grimoires, books too dangerous to destroy but too sentient to ignore. One of them, the Canticle of Ashes, allegedly sings when the vault doors are opened. Another, the Red Grimoire of Gethin, bleeds ink whenever someone nearby tells a lie. These are not metaphors but recorded phenomena, though the Ministry denies all such rumours. The safest place for a cursed book, it seems, is between denial and fear. Still, fascination with these artifacts never fades. Collectors in Nocturne Alley pay fortunes for even fragments of lost, dark manuscripts. One dealer once sold a single page said to be from the testament of Herpo the Foul. It contained nothing but an untranslatable rune. Within a month, the buyer's house had turned cold and lifeless, as though the walls themselves were grieving. His body was found days later, eyes black as ink. The page was gone. It is a chilling thought to realize that books, those symbols of learning and enlightenment, can also become traps of the soul. But in the wizarding world, every creation bears the mark of its creator. Just as a wand chooses the wizard, a dark book chooses its reader. Some scholars believe that in rare cases these books do not merely reflect evil, they preserve it. Each page, each word, becomes a fragment of its author's essence, surviving through centuries, waiting for another mind to open the door again. And when that door opens, the story continues, not on parchment, but in flesh and thought. Somewhere, perhaps still within the shifting corridors of the Librarium Umbrae, those tomes rest. They breathe softly, waiting for curiosity to lead another seeker astray. They do not need to shout. They do not need to promise power. They wait, certain that in every generation there will be someone who cannot resist the allure of forbidden knowledge, and when that person opens the cover, the page will smile, the ink will awaken, and another soul will be written into their endless, whispering story. Number 27. Darkness can enter dreams. Darkness in the wizarding world has never been limited to curses, hexes, or the flick of a wand. It has always found ways to seep into places no one expects, into the heart, the soul, and even the mind. Yet one of the most chilling truths about the dark arts is their ability to invade something far more intimate than thought itself: dreams. Within the walls of Hogwarts, whispers about so-called night charms, a forbidden branch of dark enchantments, persisted for centuries. These spells, once used by unspeakable wizards during the First Wizarding War, were said to twist dreams into tools of control, turning sleep into a battlefield where fear and suggestion reigned supreme. The connection between Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort offered the clearest glimpse into this sinister realm. Their strange bond was born from the curse that backfired the night Voldemort tried to kill the infant Harry. As Dumbledore once observed, you are connected by the very curse that failed to destroy you. That connection became a channel, fragile, unpredictable, yet powerful, through which Voldemort could peer into Harry's mind. For years, Harry's dreams were plagued by visions that felt too vivid to ignore. A snake slithering through dark corridors, the echo of cruel laughter, and faces twisted in pain. These were not mere nightmares. They were windows into Voldemort's own consciousness. It was not coincidence that during the rise of the Dark Lord, Harry's dreams became darker and more frequent. Voldemort learned to manipulate this bond, implanting sensations and illusions so real that they bled into waking life. One of the most harrowing examples occurred during Harry's 5th year at Hogwarts, when he dreamt of a long, polished corridor leading to a black door inside the Department of Mysteries. He woke with his scar burning so fiercely that he clapped a hand to his forehead, feeling as though his head would split in two. What Harry did not realize was that Voldemort had planted this image deliberately, using his own mind as a lure. This dream would later draw Harry straight into a trap that led to the death of his godfather, Sirius Black. But Voldemort's use of this technique was not a unique talent. In fact, ancient magical texts, especially those banned from the Hogwarts library, speak of spells crafted to invade and manipulate the dreaming mind. The night charms, as they were called, were first documented in the medieval era by the dark enchantress Morgana Le Fay, who used them to induce prophetic sleep among her enemies. Victims of such enchantments might not awaken for weeks, their consciousness trapped within a conjured illusion. Others suffered from violent nightmares that sapped their strength, leaving them hollow and afraid. The dreamscape, under such magic, became a prison crafted from one's deepest fears. In the time of Voldemort's rise, there were reports within the Aura office of wizards driven mad after prolonged exposure to such dark spells. Some would wake screaming of endless falls through black voids. Others would beg to stay awake, terrified that sleep would mean never waking again. It was said that the Death Eaters employed a variation of these charms to interrogate or weaken prisoners before extracting information through legilimency. Dreams, after all, were vulnerable places, stripped of logic, bound only by emotion and memory. What better stage for manipulation? This is why occlumency, the defense of the mind, was not merely an academic pursuit, but a vital survival skill in times of war. The mind is not a book to be opened at will and examined at leisure, Severus Snape once told Harry. Thoughts are not etched on the inside of skulls to be perused by any invader. Occlumency was meant to fortify the mind, to build barriers against intrusion, both waking and dreaming. A skilled occlumens could feel when another presence entered their mind, even in sleep, and shut the door against it. Yet few ever mastered it. Even among the most talented wizards, the subconscious remained an open field. Dream manipulation through night charms operated on this very weakness. By infiltrating the space between thought and sleep, a dark wizard could whisper ideas into the mind of their victim, steering them toward decisions that seemed entirely their own. The wizard Legilimens Avery, one of Voldemort's early followers, was rumored to have used these methods on ministry officials before the First Wizarding War. None could ever prove it, but several high-ranking members of the Wizengamot made decisions so strangely aligned with Death Eater interests that the Department of Magical Law Enforcement quietly suspected magical coercion. When questioned, these officials claimed to have been haunted by a shadowed figure in their dreams, urging them toward acts of necessary justice. It is no wonder, then, that Albus Dumbledore insisted Harry practice occlumency. Though Snape's lessons were harsh and cold, they were rooted in truth. The more Harry resisted, the easier it became for Voldemort to slip through the cracks. When Harry's emotions grew turbulent, grief, anger, longing, the connection widened like a wound. At those moments, the Dark Lord's presence became unmistakable. The pain in his scar was not simply physical, it was the pulse of another consciousness forcing its way inside, the ultimate violation. But the danger extended beyond Voldemort. In the archives of the Department of Mysteries, there were accounts of experimental curses performed by early practitioners of the night charms. These wizards sought not merely to observe dreams, but to shape them, to plant commands, alter memory, or induce madness. Victims of these experiments often awoke believing their own thoughts were not their own. Some would attack loved ones, claiming they had been warned in a dream. Others simply disappeared into sleep, their bodies alive but their minds trapped in a conjured nightmare. Such curses were considered so dangerous that even mentioning them became taboo among aurors. Hermione Granger once reflected on this when she read a passage in Magical Minecraft, The Theory of Conscious Enchantment, a banned text once confiscated from Nocturne Alley. It described how the boundary between legilimency and dream manipulation was thinner than most believed. If a wizard can see your thoughts while you are awake, it read, imagine what they can do when your consciousness is unguarded. The revelation chilled her. It explained why Voldemort's mental link with Harry was so effective. Harry was young, impulsive, and emotionally raw, making his mind the perfect landscape for invasion. Indeed, there were moments when the connection seemed almost reversed. When Harry, through sheer emotional force, glimpsed Voldemort's thoughts uninvited. In those fleeting visions, he saw the Dark Lord's rage, his serpentine voice commanding, "Kill the spare," or the gleam of Nagini's fangs in the dark. The horror of these visions blurred the line between dream and reality. As Dumbledore later explained, it was neither a dream nor a vision, but a bridge, one that can carry more than just thoughts. In the end, it became clear that dreams were not merely passive experiences but battlegrounds where willpower itself determined victory.